Hello and welcome to So What You're Saying Is. I'm Peter Whittle. Now I'm delighted that today we have back one of our very first guests when we started last year. Lionel Shriver is one of our most celebrated novelists. She's the author of such books as Big Brother and We Need to Talk About Kevin. She's a columnist for The Spectator, but she's also seen more and more on different media, such as most recently Question Time. Thank you for coming back a year later.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you very much.
We had a good time last time.
Yes, we did indeed. Yeah, we had a two-parter last time. I wanted to start, but it's very much in the air. Sorry, pardon that terrible pun. It's very much in the air at the moment when we're recording this, the coronavirus. I wanted to know what your view on this was. I know that you wrote an article quite recently, and I think it was sort of obviously relatively light-hearted, but you were talking about how the whole kind of woke nonsense which we addressed last time, what might actually change that, and you said it would be something very serious happening, possibly a worldwide epidemic, and here we are. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, I don't mean to be frivolous about this, and I know you weren't being, but I mean, it does appear to have wiped off, you know, from social media some of the more outrageous sort of stuff going on.
Yeah, for now.
Yeah, for now.
Yes, I've said from the beginning that the likes of identity politics are an indulgence.
Yeah.
They're ultimately an entertainment, a rather poisonous form in my view. But it's something that society can only afford in a condition of peace and prosperity. It's a kind of thumb twiddling, really. Mm. And the one thing that could make it go away is the white heat of real problems.
Yeah.
Now the trouble with that solution is then you have to have the real problems, and then we remember what trouble is. And right now, I mean, I'm less concerned on an epidemiological level. It's a tongue twister. Than I am on a fiscal one.
So tell us, you know, explain that to me.
Well, my readership may recall that in 2016 I released a book called The Mandibles. It takes place in 2029, and it involves the economic collapse of the United States, the fall of the dollar, and that's triggered by a sovereign debt crisis. The president refuses to repay the national debt; he cancels it. I would have liked to think that it was in the realm of fantasy, but actually, I don't think it is. And I did a lot of homework for that book. It was the real pleasure of that book, actually, the discovery of the world of economics, which I'd always dismissed it as boring. It's anything but boring now.
Yeah.
And I came away collectively with the impression that the entire international financial system was a house of cards, that it was fantastically built on debt and not real money, not real value, and also full of people propping each other up and lies. And I didn't realize before that we never had a system in place whereby every single currency in the world is a fiat currency, which means there's nothing backing it up and there's nothing stopping governments from producing as much currency as they want, which is what they do. It was petrifying. And therefore, what frightens me about what's going on with the markets now is that it may have been sparked by fears of a recession and the coronavirus and but it eventually a virus peaks and goes away. I worry that what happens when things are that disruptive is that everyone starts looking down. you know, what you're told not to do when you're on a precipice. And everyone discovers that the entire world economy is based on debt, because that's of course how we got out of 2008. We lowered interest rates to zero, sometimes less than zero, which of course, and that was a debt crisis, right? It was all those bad loans to people who couldn't pay back their mortgages, and that's really what sparked it. We solved it with more debt. We made it possible to borrow money for nothing. And what do you get? More debt. We've been in this debt spiral now, and we're not out of it, and it just keeps getting worse, because all you do is reward debtors, you punish savers, and you make money free. And I don't believe capitalism functions with free money. You know, then why not just borrow all the money you need for your life and then die? You don't have to earn anything. I mean, I know that's reductio ad absurdum, but it's not that crazy.
It sort of really basically means we're all bankrupt, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, it does. And I'm seriously worried. I don't know whether this is when it happens, but in my household we talk about it all the time. And it's not clear how to protect oneself from it. And I'm convinced that actually there is no protection.
When you wrote The Mandibles, which is about this, was it received as being somehow fantastical, or completely unfeasible?
Actually, the economists who read it that I know of found it totally credible, which I found both gratifying and terrifying. I didn't want to be right. I mean, that's one of the weird things about having written that book, is that I don't want to be right. I don't want to be prescient, because it's not just going to be me sitting back and being self-satisfied that I was prescient, but it's going to happen to me. It's going to happen to me. It's going to happen to my family, and my friends, and I don't want it. But when you take a look at the big picture, it's just unsustainable. The amount of debt in the world, both private and public, and corporate, is staggering. And essentially it means that we all think because debt creates money, right? It creates, because the assumption is that it's going to be paid back. If it's never going to be paid back, and the numbers look so frightening, that no, I don't think it is ever, on any of these levels, is going to be paid back, then what is supposedly an asset, because when you borrow money, then the person to whom you owe it regards that loan as an asset. All that asset is actually a big black hole. It doesn't exist. So, I don't want to be right, and I don't know whether this is it. But whenever entire monetary systems are this disturbed, and we never stopped being disturbed since 2008, nothing's ever gone back to normal, then there's the capacity for a lack of confidence, a lack of faith in the system, which is what keeps it going, to implode everything. I mean, we were joking before we started this about how, essentially the world monetary system is like belief in fairies, and if you stop believing in fairies, then Tinkerbell dies.
What point, at what point do you think a crunch would come then? If you take where we are now, and if the situation is precarious as bankrupt as that, at what point do you think, Lionel, it would sort of like suddenly turn over into something else then? At what point would the two collide, the epidemic and the economic system? At what point?
Well, they're colliding right now. I mean, I think people are torn about which issue to worry about. I can stay home and I can wash my hands, but I can't keep my stock portfolio from turning to dust. So, we do what we can do. Ultimately, with what I see is a dysfunction and also form of mass deceit. It's bigger than we are, and we can't fix it, and there's nothing to do but be fatalistic. I don't know what else to say.
I mean, you've written about it, but on the whole, would you say our culture, on the whole, basically doesn't address this, does it? I mean, are there other novelists or, artists or playwrights who actually talks about this?
The apocalyptic narrative is commonplace in fiction.
Yeah.
But there are not very many economic dystopias, and I think that's where my book tends to stand out. And I do think that the fragility of economic systems may be even more important than climate change. And the other thing is that what we're seeing now is that problems don't exist in a vacuum, and they interact. So economic fragility also interacts with a pandemic, with climate change, with migration, everything.
But the thing is, you do take on these sort of big issues, don't you? Healthcare is another one.
Yes. However, improbably.
Big Brother.
Yeah.
You take.
Actually, so much for that is all about the dysfunctions of American healthcare.
Right. So much for that. But I mean, the point is, on the whole, I think our culture, is characterized by people not taking on these big things.
Well, part of it is, of course, rationally, a lot of fiction readers don't want to read about it. So, it needs to be packaged in such a way that it's a good story and is involving for its own sake, and not just because it's worthy or calling your attention to something that's terribly important. And first and foremost, whenever I'm writing any book, whatever issue I might be addressing, it's more important than anything to tell an entertaining story that and that's well written and funny and has lots of dialogue, and that's my job. And therefore ultimately I'm when I take on bigger issues, it's always a kind of candy coating. I'm making it fun.
But they're there. I mean, that's the background to them. I mean, I was reminded of this when you wrote recently in The Spectator. If I could just give a bit of background, you wrote recently after I think one of those Question Time appearances. You sort of got notification of the end of a friendship from another writer. But you mentioned you did an open letter in The Spectator. This is what you wrote to her, and you said, I tend to take on broad issues, and I think that you said this person tended to be more intimate, shall we say, in their writing. But that was quite extraordinary, really. This was a relatively long friendship.
Yeah, 13 years.
And what happened, actually, Lionel? What happened to end it?
Well, of course, as a fiction writer, I probably shouldn't be going on Question Time to begin with. The risks are too high. And I don't do it very often.
No, but you're a columnist for Spectator.
But I am a columnist, and I take an interest in British politics, and I'm one of the people they call who isn't, on the far left. One of the few people, that they use to try to balance the panel, and a non-politician, obviously. So that was an episode in which once more the outrage of Boris Johnson's comparing a veiled woman to a letterbox was touted out as proof that he's a terrible racist, and throughout the campaign it was also used as an example of why the entire Tory party is racist. And I just said, excuse me, but what is so insulting about being compared to a letterbox? I just don't think it's self-evident it's a small element of domestic architecture. It's like saying, you look like a window sash. Ooh.
Wounding.
And one of the reasons I said that, I get so frustrated that people take on faith how they should interpret something like that. You know, why don't they think from themselves, well, hold on a minute. Well, it's kind of a kooky comparison, but why is that so hurtful? So I got into an argument with a couple of Muslim women who were, you know the type, professionally incensed. And they probably hire themselves out for parties. And this and a couple of other remarks was enough to lose me this friendship. And I did find it shocking. This is a very decent, nice person, and I was really disappointed. And I went through an interesting emotional sequence because, often when people do something that strikes home, then your first reaction is anger, which is very defensive. It's like, and then once you get a little perspective, you have to admit to yourself that what you're really experiencing is a sense of injury.
Yes,
and sorrow and hurt. And for me, it was completely to the opposite sequence, because I felt hurt first.
Yes.
And then I realized, actually, I'm fucking furious.
Yeah.
And to have been sacked as a friend because I didn't think that comparing someone to a letterbox was especially insulting. I mean, that has comic potential, but it was real. And it made me sympathetic with a lot of other people who are having the same problems. I mean, we now live in a very polarized time when relationships are conditional, and I know that a lot of relationships have been severed over Brexit, and of course that was part of the basket of complaints that my friend has.
I think we talked about this last time, but it always appeared one way. I'm sorry, to me it's always appeared one way. It's just that basically, in the case of Brexit, the Remainer,
of course,
finds it impossible, because this is some kind of implicit comment on them that they could even be friends with someone who voted Brexit. I mean, in this case with your friend, in this particular case, from what I can gather, this person said, we don't share the same values.
Right.
So wait a minute, 13, 14-year friendship, it would take surely a very long time, therefore, for this person to have discovered that you don't share. What does it even...
you would think that what my values were would be fairly apparent early on. And the left always uses that kind of language when they mean that that they're accusing you of being a bigot.
A bigot.
That's what not having the same values always means. This has been observed plenty, so it's not fresh. But yes, people on the left now are sufficiently self-righteous that they and believe that the correctness of their causes is so self-evident that if you disagree on anything, because they subscribe to a set menu of opinions, if you disagree on anything, then you are not simply wrong; you are evil. It is, and this is a polarity that means that you've no longer got a functional public discourse.
Well, one of the areas that it should be an area where discourse happens, of course, is in the arts generally, and it's something that I think we would agree on. But saw it in black and white recently. There was a report that came out from a group called Arts Professional. I think that they are, an employment body, as it were, for people who work in the arts. And they came out with, it was reported in the Times, you probably saw it.
I saw it.
It was reported extraordinary level of a monolithic opinion, and that people who sort of in any way resile from what is considered to be the right opinion are ostracized, and this report said that some people even had things like gagging orders or something put on them. But it was very frightening, actually. Yeah. But this is the...
Well, it was a documentation of what we suspected anyway,
yes.
That the arts have across the board, and that's across media, have become exclusively not just left-wing, but quite hard left. We're always flopping about trying to figure out what language to use to identify this particular sector. And it brooks no argument. It also controls who gets money, who gets their plays put on. There was that Brexit, one of the rare productions of People Like Us. That I didn't see it. I should have. But you know, it had one production. It was hugely popular, and then never, no one picked it up. No one took it to the next level. Whereas there were these Remainer plays all over the place. The Battle of Ideas lost its venue.
Did it?
The Barbican.
Really?
Because Claire was an MEP for the Brexit Party, and that was it. She was demonized.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Going to be talking to Claire later, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell her
really?
I said that.
I had no idea about that.
Yeah.
That's frightening.
So, I mean, those are real instances, but that's the tip of the iceberg. I'm a little mystified how this happened, because you would think that the arts draw maverick personalities, but apparently not.
No, not in my experience.
Yeah.
not at all, no.
And I was thinking about this on the way over. It has to have something to do with the fact that now artists tend to go to schools. They get educated in creative writing, or they get degrees in visual art, whereas in the olden days, if you wanted to be an artist of any sort, you just struck out on your own, and if you wanted to be a writer, you read a bunch of books and sat around writing stuff. You didn't get a degree. And that means that artists are heavily infected by what's going on in universities and that kind of groupthink. One of the scariest examples of groupthink most recently is the Woody Allen story.
I was going to ask you exactly about that. I mean, this is Woody Allen's memoir.
Yeah.
It's apropos of nothing.
Yes.
And basically, I think in a nutshell, somebody objected to it, the publishing house, and there was a sort of walkout, I think, of people, we are not going to publish this book. What was their objection?
Okay. First off, I thought it was pretty shameful that that this memoir was sent around to all the major publishers, and only one of them would pick it up. According to my editor in New York, she read it. She said it's a very good book. And publishing, for the most part, publishes tons of terrible books. So if it was a very good book, you would think that with a famous author, someone would pick it up. But, yes. And it was picked up on the QT by Hachette. They did not advertise it much, which is not like, that's not the way publishing's supposed to work. You're supposed to go, So it was as if, it was shameful. And then, I don't know what took the staff so long to figure out that this book was coming out, because I think it was supposed to be out next month.
Yeah.
That means it has to be pretty much ready to go.
Oh, they're pulping it, I think.
Yeah. The staff, and it is my impression that it is the lower level staff. Basically a bunch of editorial assistants, which means, they're 12 years old. And they staged a one-day walkout, and Hachette freaked out and withdrew the publication after very little pressure. And I find this upsetting in so many different levels. What they're upset about is this accusation by his daughter Dylan that he sexually assaulted her when she was 7 years old. This accusation has been exhaustively investigated by 2 different government bodies, one for 8 months, one for 14 months. They found nothing. And her story is riddled with inconsistencies. And I don't know about you, but when I remember barely being 7 years old, it's just like this. That early on, those memories are poorly formed and fragile. And in early memories, being fragile and impressionistic and made of little scraps are very easy to imprint upon. And her mother's a nut. Her mother is a nut, hated Woody Allen because he married her adoptive daughter. It's another issue. And I think that she brainwashed her kids. And there's just no evidence. And yet, because and it was more or less originally dismissed, but then there was the Me Too movement. And then, we're supposed to believe women. It's one of the creepiest slogans I've ever heard. Which is, as I've written before, right next door to believe everybody. Yes. And then suddenly we're supposed to believe this story. And of course, Ronan Farrow, her brother, who's become very powerful, is also behind this. And he made he took his own book away from Hachette in protest that they are publishing Woody Allen's memoirs. So that added, I think, an additional economic incentive to cave. But the precedent set is horrifying. I mean, first off, there's the precedent of no due process, that Woody Allen is being crucified by rumor, by impression.
There have never been any charges.
No, by a kind of contemporary superstition that if a woman makes an accusation, then she must be right. And, he has no history of child abuse or sexual assault of any kind. And though in a completely cowardly manner, in my opinion, there have been a number of actors who have, post-Me Too, announced that they will never work with him again.
Oh, more than that, regretted working with him.
Oh, yes, and regretted working with him. There's no basis for this.
But the thing is, you see, Lionel, with this, because there's no basis at all, but even, it's a bit of a problem, really, even if there had been a basis. Take Ronan Polanski, for example.
Right. I think it's important to keep those stories apart.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. I mean, he was convicted of rape.
Right. Do you think, therefore, that, for example, in another sort of act of censorship, if you like, we are not being able to see his latest film about Dreyfus? It's not going to be distributed in America. It's not going to be distributed here.
I think it's important to keep them separate, because Woody Allen has never been convicted of anything. Okay. It is true that if we're going to look at Polanski separately, I have been a big advocate of not confusing the art and the artist.
Right.
So as you do, I sense.
Yeah.
I would like to see the new film.
Yeah.
And I don't need to be morally protected because the person who made it is tainted. That doesn't mean that he shouldn't be sent back to the U.S. to serve his sentence. Fair enough. But I'd like to see the movie.
Well, yes,
Right?
I mean, the thing is, if you go back, it's a cliche, I know, but if you go back through all the history of writing and visual art and music, there are some pretty appalling people, behind them.
Yeah, and I think this is an arts consumer issue. It's not just a matter of protecting the artists who are all fallen angels. I should know.
Yes.
But the arts consumer has a right to the stuff. I want the stuff. I want the books, the movies, the paintings. made by these imperfect people. And just because the people who made them are imperfect doesn't mean that the work they make is not wonderful. And you know, I've been consistent on this point. I know that lots of people are very gossipy and involved in the real lives of the artists they enjoy, the writers, etc. You know, and they're fascinated by their real life story. I never have been. I never read literary biographies. I don't care who made them. I really don't. I'm just interested in the books. I want to look at the paintings. I want to listen to the music, and I don't care who made it. Now, I'm not prescriptive, and I'm not saying that everyone has to be that way. And if you're curious about the nature of the people who make what you love or hate, fine, you know. But I'm just saying, I have been consistent. I do think there is a separation between people and what they make.
Yeah.
And I want what they make to be put on the marketplace. I would like to be able to read Woody Allen's memoir.
Yes, I was in America recently and I was looking forward to getting it, and I was a bit behind the loop there. But this thing of basically the artist being quite separate from the work, there is some sort of parallel here as well with what you would call the general air now of restriction on free speech. You know, in the sense that rather than the man or woman rather than the ball, if you like, is played. You know, so if they say something, it's basically the attack tends to be on the individual. You know, this seems to be a very, is it puritanical? I mean, it's certainly like the Crucible. You know, where you are somehow something that you are or that you've done is going to scar you in everything you say or do from now on. And I'm thinking of this because recently Toby Young, who we had on the show, started the Free Speech Union, which I've joined, and I know that you've joined. In fact, you spoke at the, well, on camera at least, at the launch. I mean, what have we come to, Lionel, when you need in Britain a Free Speech Union?
Well, it's depressing, isn't it? I mean, it shouldn't be necessary. And I think, you know, it's a potentially useful organization, because I think the experience of you know, being the subject of some kind of pile-on is one of tremendous helplessness. And, you know, why me and what do I do? And this is providing a resort. You know, this is what you do. Maybe you need a lawyer. Maybe you need to go after people who are maligning you in a libelous manner. So I think it's a great idea, but it is a sign of the times that Toby was moved to establish it.
I think as well, though, there's another problem, isn't there? Surely that when these things arise, my feeling often is, good, it's good, we probably should have many more of these associations. We hope in our way to do something like that here, you know, but I think that the biggest thing facing us surely is self-censorship, that these things are now so internalized, you know, I mean, whether it's writers, you know, or that somehow or other, you know, the horse is bolted, you know, the horse is bolted, you know, and now we're locking the gate. You know, then essentially it's so now inside us that we just simply won't do or say certain things.
Yes, which is a larger issue than the arts. I think that this is something that the entire Western public is now suffering from, a sense that you'd better keep your mouth shut, that if you can't keep up with the latest lingo, it's better to say nothing and stay on safe subjects. But the narrowing of what it is permissible to say and to advocate and to illustrate in the arts is also a loss for everyone and not just for artists. It means that there is a very narrow range of subject matter and viewpoint available for purchase. I mean, you know, that all the movies and all the books, basically all you can buy is racism is bad. know, and yeah, racism is bad, and that's just bores the pants off me. I mean, I am recording, what's it called? Noughts and Crosses.
Oh yeah.
Right? I haven't seen it yet, and I notice that though I've got 2 episodes, I still haven't watched it. And there's a way that I'm going to have to force myself, just because, it's not because I'm a raving bigot, though you notice that as soon as I say that, it sounds suspicious. It's because I can't stand moral obviousness. And so this is a big racism is bad production, and I hate having that shoved down my throat.
It's pretty much par for the course, isn't it? As you say, it's in all of our productions now, drama, whatever, these issues are shoehorned in.
Yeah.
All the time. Do you think that...
And I feel condescended to.
Oh yes. But this might be one of the reasons as well why British drama, particularly, I know more about that than other dramas, but it seems to have lost its place as being amongst the greatest, because it's always correcting history, and it's always sort of saying that this is the bad guy, this is the good guy.
Oh, it's the very definition of propaganda, right? And who wants to watch that? It's tedious. So that's the thing. One of my biggest concerns is not just as an artist that I feel a little hemmed in, a lot hemmed in, but I don't want to consume most of this dreck. You know, and one of the horrible things that seems to have happened in the arts is it isn't just the narrowness of the viewpoint, but this notion seems to have taken hold that the purpose of art is to morally instruct. And I'm sorry, but when I watch a television drama, open a novel, I don't want to be told, you know, I don't want a Sunday school lesson. I want to be entertained. I want something to happen that's unexpected. I want to see some daring. I want to see people do things that I wouldn't have thought of myself. You know, I want something that redeems the time I give it. And this whole idea that what motivates people to go to the arts and why we have the arts is just to promote virtue is perverse, and also produces, big surprise, bad art.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, would you ever, as a writer, an artist, would you ever take on this issue in a novel? When I say this issue, I mean the one we've been discussing, the increasing restriction on free speech. Would this ever form the backdrop of a novel?
Oh, of course, the big danger is having the same problem in reverse and writing more propaganda. It's funny, the Alameda Theater came to me a couple of years ago inviting me to write a play having something to do with identity politics. And while I was at first attracted to it, and I put it kind of on the back burner, the reason I haven't returned to it is I'm afraid of just doing the same thing and still being polemical. Yeah. And, you know, doing a kind of go Jordan Peterson play, which isn't, you know, I don't have a big problem with him, but
you have big problems.
I do not.
You do not.
I do not. But I don't want to write a novel or a play that is too freighted. Yeah. I mean, there's a little section in the novel that comes out this spring.
Yes, as you know,
right.
This is finished and done. I was going to ask if you were working on it. Oh, you are?
Yeah, it's in the can. Yeah. I am working on something, but
it will be out in the spring.
It will be out at the beginning of May.
Are we allowed a title? Do we know? Or
it's
anything?
Called The Motion of the Body Through Space.
The Motion of the Body Through Space. Right.
And its primary target is the cult of exercise.
Oh, okay.
All right, so it's not entirely about, evil identity politics. But it does have a little backstory.
Well, that's fascinating.
And because I have a character who becomes obsessed with these extreme endurance sports, and you need something to get him there. Why was this mild-mannered guy who basically a couch potato most of his life suddenly driven to become a hard body like that? And so I designed a backstory in which he had recently and ignominiously been sacked from his job. And it was because of an altercation with an incompetent diversity hire who became his boss.
Right.
And of course, just the crafting of an incompetent diversity hire is extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
And I knew that. Right.
Yeah.
So there's probably a little element of red flag to the bull there, because I can either avoid this stuff and be very cautious with that kind of self-censorship, which is what you were talking about, or I can say fuck you.
Yeah.
So,
but your main character is this guy in the book, right? You're not staying in your lane, I mean, this whole stay in your lane business we discussed before.
I know, and I deliberately put two black characters in the new book, and that's by way of carving out my right to craft black characters. And I think that a lot of writers, a lot of white writers, are avoiding that now. And in some ways, the people who are big on diversity and otherwise big on diversity in fiction may get what they don't ever say expressly that they want, which is white writers only writing about white people. And you've only got you've now got this kind of back to the 1950s apartheid, because it's too dangerous. I mean, I'm sure you followed the American Dirt story.
When is the book coming out?
I think it's the 5th of May.
5th of May.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I will definitely read that, because I've if it's the whole issue of exercise, which of course, this is taking one issue and just drawing all sorts of things.
Well,
about
in some ways,
society.
it's me one more time going for the sacred cows of the contemporary culture, and exercise has become next to godliness in the Western world. It's the one thing that people are now even touchier about than their weight, though there's a little intersection.
You've done that though with Big Brother weight.
Yeah, but I didn't want to do that again.
No.
I'm very interested in the fact that, especially during the last 20 years, and nobody ever talks about the phenomenon. They talk about what they're doing and what their workout regime is. I mean, it gets incredibly tiresome. I mean, there's the number of events, these mass events, climbing some mountain or running up and down the Empire State Building, or not to mention all the triathlons and the marathons. I mean, they just keep multiplying. But I don't notice anybody calling attention to the phenomenon itself, stepping back and say, how did we get here? Why are we so consumed with this? Why is that what everyone is talking about? Why is that what we're now more competitive with each other about than any other thing?
I've always sort of thought, I mean, I'm a bit of a, I can't be a hypocrite here. I've always sort of exercised and everything, although now I just do boxing. But I've always found it very boring. But I always sort of felt that it was all about vanity, in the sense that,
Oh, it's mostly vanity.
If someone brought out a pill which meant that you look fantastic naked, the gyms would empty.
That's right. Actually, that's funny. There's a little passage in my new book in which I made up a short story. I didn't actually write the story, so you just get a summary of a story that I never wrote. But it's about a world of the future in which there's something called a Morfitt Ron that will work out your body while you sleep. And I think it's my personal fantasy, because I find exercise. I love playing tennis. That's totally sacred. But exercise in general is extremely tedious. Yeah. It's very boring, and I would love to just plug in.
Well, look, thank you very, very much, Lionel, for coming. Look forward to that new book in a couple of months' time.
I think you'll enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you very much for coming. Thanks for coming back again. I do hope that it's not another year before you do join us again. I think maybe around about the time, possibly, of the presidential election. I'd be very pleased to have you on. Because you have dual citizenship, don't you? You have, you can vote in America, can't you? And everything. And I think it's going to be fascinating. Any thoughts on what you might think might happen there?
Well, of course, at this exact juncture, it looks like Biden's going to be the nominee. Trump is in big trouble. He's not handling this virus very well. And it looks as if he might well lose. But then who knows what's going to happen? I mean, politics and the whole world has become so weird that making predictions is foolish. All I can say is I hope that Trump is defeated. I think it would be really bad news for my country to have him president for another 4 years.
You've never been a fan of his, have you?
No.
Well, in that case, when it's happening, please do come back, won't you?
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Lionel.
That's it for this time. So see you next time on So What You're Saying Is, and thank you for watching. Thanks. Bye.